Good morning, children. We are going to see the second unit prose. Yesterday I completed second unit poem, The Grumbling Family. Now we are going to see the prose side, The Night the Ghost Got In. It's a very interesting story where the suspense is maintained till the end. We do not know what is happening in the middle, but in the end the suspense is revealed. The family undergoes lot of turmoil and confusion because they think that the ghost has entered the house. Some spirit has entered the house and that was completely tormenting them. So they were not able to move and they were unable to do their work. It was night time and they felt that some unusual spirit has entered the house. So this story is completely a narration by the author James Grover Thurber. He is the narrator and he is the author of the story. Now we will see. Imagination of what things always leads to absolute humor. Definitely this leads to laughter only. Finally when you come to the suspense you feel like laughing. So the imagination of what things. For example, if we have some dreams, if we have some bad dreams, after when we get up in the morning we feel like laughing. What an unusual dream I got. The same way the story is based on such an imagination, at the end you feel like laughing. That is humor. Read the lesson and enjoy the narrator's experience. Here the narrator is the author James Thurber. With his grandfather who creates chaos, it should be pronounced as chaos, confusion. Chaos means confusion, and laughter with his imaginative stories. So with these imaginative stories he has written this narration. We are going to see about it. The ghost that got into our house on the night of November 17, 1915 raised such a hullabaloo. A misunderstanding that I am sorry I didn't just let it keep on walking and go to bed. Its advent means entry, caused my mother to throw a shoe through a window at the house next door and ended up with my grandfather shooting a patrolman, a police officer. I am sorry therefore, as I have said, that I ever paid any attention to the footsteps. So this author was completely confused. He did not want to go down and see who was walking. He was just hearing the footsteps that someone was moving inside the house, and with this excitement he raised a big chaos in the whole family, and the family was completely frightened to move about. They did not want to come out of their room. So this narrator is telling his experience, what all happened during that night. Now we will see. They began about 1:15 o'clock in the morning. That was it exactly in the midnight. A rhythmic, quick, cadenced walking around the dining room table. Even we will be afraid. There are some haunted houses, but we do not want to live there. But people say the footsteps alone could be heard. You cannot see the person who is walking. That is, they feel that is the ghost or the spirit that moves. So here this narrator is feeling that someone was moving in the ground floor and he could hear the footsteps very clearly. So he got frightened. When everybody was in the bed, how can anyone come during that midnight and walk in the room? That was his confusion. Walking around the dining room table. So particularly these footsteps were heard in the dining room table. My mother was asleep in one room upstairs, my brother Herman in another, grandfather was in the attic. I have given the meaning for attic here, a space inside the roof of a building. Now we have the shelf over there. Now we have in a room, if it is a kitchen, we have this a slab that is laid to place all the vessels. In those countries they have a long projection where people will go climb and sleep there. That will be like what you call as a space between the building and the room. That will be a wide space where one person can go and hide and one person can lie down and sleep. So that is known as an attic, a space inside the roof of a building. Slamming, shutting a door or window forcefully. Now we see this. Now his brother, his mother and his grandfather were all asleep in that midnight. Grandfather was in the attic in the old walnut bed which, as you will remember, once fell on my father. I had just stepped out of the bathtub and was busily rubbing myself with a towel when I heard the footsteps. He was having his bath in that night and when he came out of that, he could hear someone moving in the dining room. The light from the bathroom shone down the back steps which dropped directly into the dining room. I could see the faint sign of plates on the plate rail. I couldn't see the table. The steps kept going round and round the table at regular intervals. A board creaked when it was trod upon. So, some unusual steps were moving in the dining room. He could hear very clearly the steps were moving very slowly. I supposed at first that it was my father or my brother Roy who had gone to Indianapolis but were expected home at any time. So, his father, the narrator's father, and his other brother were not at home. They were in Indianapolis. I suspected next that it was a burglar. The next thought he thinks is some thief would have stolen. Burglar means a thief would have stolen inside the house. It did not enter my mind until later that it was a ghost. It did not enter its mind. Finally, he thought it must be a ghost. First, he thought it must be a thief who had entered the house. Next, for a very long time, he didn't think. And after that, he was thinking whether a ghost would have been moving around the dining room. After the walking had gone on for perhaps 3 minutes, I tiptoed to Herman's room. So, for some time he was standing there and listening to the footsteps, and after that he tiptoed. That means he did not walk, he was having a step like this and he was walking like that to his brother's room, Herman. I tiptoed to Herman's room. Pass, I hissed. In the dark, shaking him up, he said in the low, hopeless tone of a despondent beagle. You always half suspected that something would get him in the night. I told him who I was. There is something downstairs. He woke his brother and he told that his brother that someone was downstairs moving around. Will you come with me? He was afraid to go alone. The narrator was afraid to go alone, so he woke up his brother and he wanted him to accompany him down to go and see who was there. Followed me to the head of the back staircase. The steps had stopped. When both were about to go down, the steps has ceased. That means it has stopped. They could not hear the steps moving. I had only the bath towel around my waist. He wanted to go back to bed. I gripped his arm. So his brother got frightened and he said, I am not coming, you go man. The narrator held his wrist, but he was not willing to go with the narrator. There is something down there, I said. Instantly the steps began again. For a short period, it was quiet. Again the steps started moving. He could hear the steps moving around the dining room, circled the dining room table like a man running and started up the stairs towards us, heavily 2 at a time. The light still shone palely down the stairs. We saw nothing coming. He could not see, but the light was there, but he could not see any person inside the dining room. That was the highlight of the drama here. We only heard the steps. Herman rushed to his room and slammed the door. He could no more stand here because his brother was standing and he was standing. He could hear the footsteps very clearly. He said he got frightened and he left his brother and he went and closed his bedroom at the stair stop and held my knee against it. After a long minute, I slowly opened it again. There was nothing there. There was no sound. None of us ever heard the ghost again. So, for a only short period, they could hear the footsteps, and after some time, they could not hear the footsteps in the dining room. The slamming of the doors, closing and opening of the doors had aroused mother. That means that woke up his mother who was in the next room. She peered out of her room. What on earth are you boys doing? At this midnight, what boys are you doing? You didn't go to sleep, she is asking. She demanded. Herman ventured out of his room. Nothing, he said. He did not want to frighten his mother. He said, Ma, you go inside and sleep. Nothing is wrong here, he said. Gruffly, that means I have written the word gruffly here, sadly, very sadly, he said, nothing is wrong, you go and have a good sleep. But he was in color, a light green. What was all that running around downstairs? So he couldn't imagine what was running around. I could hear the footsteps downstairs going round and round. What was all that running around downstairs? Said mother. So she had heard the steps too. So here the mother also hears the footsteps in the ground floor, that is the downstairs where the dining room is placed. She could also hear the footsteps moving. Burglars, she shouted intuitively. So she said, there must be burglars entering the house. They have entered the house and we can see that they are moving inside the dining room. I tried to quieten her by starting lightly downstairs. Without reasoning, she said, some burglars must have entered this house. Come on, Herman, I said. I'll stay with mother, he said. She is all excited. Now he wants to wake up his brother and said, you go down and see what is happening. Now mother is all excited. We have to keep her calm, the narrator says. I stepped back onto the landing. Don't either of you go a step, said mother. We'll call the police. So the mother said, don't go down, don't get hurt. Definitely the burglars will hurt you, don't go down. I'll call the police, she says. Since the phone was downstairs, I didn't see how we were going to call the police. So they did not have any communication. The phone was on the ground floor. So they must go down to ring up the police. So, nor did I want the police, but mother made one of her quick, incomparable decisions. Immediately mother took a firm decision. She flung up a window of her bedroom which faced the bedroom windows of the house of a neighbor. The next door's neighbor's house were just opposite and her bedroom window was facing their bedroom window. Picked up a shoe and whammed it through a pane of glass across the space that separated the two houses. She took her shoes and threw it at the window of the neighbor. Glass tinkled into the bedroom occupied by a retired engraver named Bodwell and his wife. Bodwell had been for some years in rather a bad way and was subject to mild attacks. Almost everybody we knew or lived near had some kind of attacks. So this man, Bodwell, and his wife were living in the opposite house. As soon as the shoes hit the window, the glass panes broke. He already had an attack. So this man must be feeling a severe shock there. It was now about 2 o'clock of a moonless night. It was very dark. There was no moon in the sky. Clouds hung black and low. So it was going to rain. Completely the sky was cast with the clouds. Bodwell was at the window in a minute. Within a minute, as soon as the shoe hit their window pane, Bodwell was near the window, shouting, frothing a little. He was shouting at the narrator's mother, shaking his fist. At what time you are throwing the shoes and you are disturbing us? We'll sell the house and go back to Peoria. So she, this is a great nuisance for us. Now you are disturbing us, our sleep. We are going to sell this house and we are going to move to Peoria. We could hear Mrs. Bodwell saying it was some time before mother got through to Bodwell. Burglars, she shouted. Burglars in the house? Herman and I hadn't dared to tell her that it was not burglars but ghosts. But this woman said, the narrator's mother said that burglars have entered the house. So she is warning the neighbors also about the burglars entering the house. She was even more afraid of ghosts than of burglars. So these boys did not tell their mother that a ghost has entered. So she was in the idea that the burglars must have broke open the doors and they would have entered. So if they say the ghost would have entered, she would be frightened more. So these boys did not want to make their mother more excited and confused. Bodwell at first thought that she meant there were burglars in his house, but finally he quieted down and called the police for us over an extension phone by his bed. Immediately Bodwell came to their rescue. He called the policeman to come and see what is happening in the neighbor's house. After he had disappeared from the window, mother suddenly made as if to throw another shoe, not because there was further need of it, but as she later explained, because the thrill of heaving a shoe through a window glass had enormously taken her fancy. I prevented her. So again she wanted to throw another shoe, but the narrator said, don't do that, ma. So the narrator prevented her not to do any such thing. Already this man would have called the police. The police were on hand in a commendably short time. In European countries, you see, as soon as we make a call, not like India, they take time. As soon as they receive a call, they immediately come to our doorstep for any help or rescue. A Ford sedan, full of them, 2 on motorcycles and a patrol wagon with about 8 in it and few reporters. Immediately, the media reporters also accompanied and they also came along with the police officers. They began banging at our front door. Flashlights shot, streaks of gleam up and down the walls. You know very well, all the lights will be in the police van and completely the area was lit up. across the yard, down the walk between our house and Boardwell's. Open up, cried a hoarse voice. So the police officer cried in a very hoarse, rough voice telling, open the window. We are men from headquarters. I wanted to go down and let them in. Since they were, but mother wouldn't hear of it. You haven't stitched on, she pointed out. You'd catch your death. I wound the towel around me again. Finally, the cops put their shoulders to our big, heavy front door with its thick, beveled glass and broke it in. I could hear a rending of wood and a splash of glass on the floor of the hall. Their lights played all over the living room and crisscrossed nervously in the dining room, stabbed into hallways, shot up the front stairs, and finally up the back. They caught me standing in my towel at the top. A heavy policeman bounded up the steps. Who are you? He demanded. I live here, he said. So the policeman could not come inside. Finally, they broke open the glass panes of the door and they entered. They went through all the downstairs room and they couldn't find anyone. They shot the light on top. There the narrator was standing with this towel wound round his waist. The officer in charge reported to mother, no sign of nobody, lady. No sign here. Nobody is here in this. We searched everywhere. No burglar is here, they said. Must have got away. What you would like. There were 2 or 3 men, mother said, whooping and carrying on, slamming doors. Funny, said the cop. All your windows and door was locked on the inside, tight as a tick. How can anyone enter? We broke open your doors and we came inside. It was locked. How can any burglar enter inside your house? That was the question of the police officer. Downstairs we could hear the tromping of the other police officer. Police were all over the place. Doors were yanked, open drawers were yanked, open windows were shot up and pulled down, furniture fell with dull thumps. Half a dozen policemen emerged out of darkness of the front hallway upstairs. They began to ransack the floor, pulled beds away from the walls, tore clothes off. So all the commotion was going on because of this mother's report about the burglars. They were pulling everything, jamming everything. They were pulling out the drawers, they were pulling out the beds. Everything was strewn all over the floor. There was lot of confusion in the narrator's house. Pulled suitcase and boxes of shells. One of them found an old zither that Roy had won in a pool tournament. That is a musical instrument. That's a musical instrument, always remember. Look here, Joe, he said, drumming it with a big paw. Just like a guitar, it will be a big one. His brother got a prize while he took the first place in his swimming. The cop named Joe took it and turned it over. What is it, he asked. It's an old zither our guinea pig used to sleep on. Guinea pig I have already written. It is given there. It is a rodent, a bigger size of the rat family. Rodents means that belongs to the rat family. It is a guinea pig, they say. It is not guinea pig, it is guinea pig used to sleep on. Say they kept the instrument on top of it, everything was covered. A guinea pig, they had a pet, a guinea pig, and on top of it, this guinea pig used to sleep. I said it was true that a pet guinea, so this was a pet. They reared this pet in the house. Guinea pig we once had would never sleep anywhere except on the zither. But I should never have said so. Joe and the other cop looked at me a long time. They put the zither back on the shelf. So they disturbed everything, and this narrator was telling this particular pet used to sleep on that musical instrument which was covered, and it treated that as a cushion. No sign of anything, said the cop who had first spoken to mother. The lady seems hysterical, so they thought this woman must be mad. The narrator's mothers must be mad. They searched every nook and corner. They could not find any burglar inside. They all nodded but said nothing, just looked at me. In the small silence, we all heard a creaking in the attic. Suddenly, grandfather woke up. He was in the attic and he did not understand what was going down. So he got up by the slightest noise made by the policeman. Was turning over in bed. What's that? Snapped Joe. 5 or 6 cops sprang for the attic door before I could intervene or explain. I realized that it would be bad if they burst in on grandfather unannounced or even announced. He was going through a phase in which he believed that General Meade's men under steady hammering by Stonewall Jackson were beginning to retreat and even desert. Now this grandfather was in the army for a for a long period. So, he had some enemies there. So, if this grandfather was going to be disturbed in his night sleep, he would get confused and he would have some problem with the policeman. That happened here. Now, grandfather woke up after hearing the disturbance here, he woke up in his attic. When I got to the attic, things were pretty confused. Everything got confused. Grandfather had evidently jumped to the conclusion that the police were deserters from Meade's army. So, he thought the army men who left the army have come back. He thought. He was in his own imagination. Grandfather was in his own imagination since he was very old. Deserters from Meade's army trying to hide away in his attic. He thought that some men have come here to hide in his attic. He bounded out of bed wearing a long flannel nightgown over long woolen pants, a nightcap and a leather jacket around his chest. He got down from his attic. He dressed himself. The cops must have realized at once that the indignant white-haired old man belonged to the house. But they had no choice to say, "Back, ye cowardly dog," roared grandfather. So, this grandfather used these words. They thought this grandfather is very angry. He was very angry after seeing so many men inside. He thought the army men who have already left the army have returned back to attack him. So, "Back, ye cowardly dog." He used the words cowardly dog to the police officers. Roared grandfather, "Back the lines, ye goddam lily-livered cattle." With that, he fetched. All these are words he speaks to the policeman. A flat-handed smack alongside is that sent him sprawling. The others beat a retreat, but not enough. Grandfather grabbed Zaida's gun from its holster. A holder to hold a gun. It is made out of leather. The guns usually they have a leather. Inside they place this gun. So, he took the gun out of the holster and let fly. The report seemed to crack the rafters. Smoke filled the attic. Immediately he fired. The entire place was covered with smoke. A cop cursed and shot his hand to his shoulder. Somehow we all finally got downstairs again and locked the door against the old gentleman. He fired once or twice more in the darkness and then went back to bed. They wanted to put their grandfather in a calm way, so they locked the door and left them in his attic, and they all came downstairs with a policeman. One policeman was hurt when grandfather shot. It shot him in his shoulder. That was grandfather's, I explained to Joe. So, he explained to Joe out of breath. "He thinks you are a deserter." "I'll say he does," said Joe. The cops were reluctant to leave without getting their hand on somebody besides grandfather. So, they wanted to get the burglar somehow. So, they were going round and round. They did not move away from the house. So, they wanted to stay there and find out who was inside the house. The night had been distinctly a defeat for them. They could not find anyone there. Furthermore, they obviously didn't like the layout something looked, and I can see their viewpoint phony. They began to poke into things again. A reporter, a thin-faced, wispy man, came up to me. I had put on one of mother's dress, not being able to find anything. Finally, when the policeman entered, he could not find his dress. He took his mother's nightie and he was wearing over him. So, the reporter was looking at him very curiously whether he was a man or a woman. Suspicion and interest with him, mingled suspicion whether this man is a man or a woman, because he was wearing his mother's long nightie. Just what the hell is the real lowdown here? But he asked. I decided to be frank with him. "We had ghosts," I said. Finally, the reporter, he said, "I thought some ghosts have entered the house. Mother says burglars, but I say it was the ghost." He gazed at me a long time as if I were a slot machine into which he had, without results, dropped a coin. Then he walked away. The cops followed him. The one grandfather shot, holding his now bandaged arm, cursing and the man who was shot by grandfather was just cursing and scolding grandfather and the whole household people. "I'm gonna get my gun back from that old bird," said Zai the cop. "Hey," said Joe, "you and who else?" I told them I would bring it to the station house the next day. So they said, "The man who shot must bring the gun to the police station. He must not have it. He is injuring everyone." That was the report. "What was the matter with that one policeman?" mother asked. After they had gone, grandfather shot him. So grandmother said, "What happened to that man, that cop?" Cop means police officer. "What happened to that man? He is shouting and cursing us." "That man was shot by grandfather," he said. The narrator said, What for? She demanded. I told her he was a deserter. Of all things, said mother, he was such a nice looking young man. Poor man, he was a nice looking young man, how that he got shot. Grandfather was fresh as a daisy and full of jokes at breakfast next morning. So what happened the next morning? As if grandfather did not have anything that previous night, he was fast asleep. The next morning, he woke up like a fresh flower. He is comparing grandfather's face to a daisy. The daisy will be very beautiful when it blooms in the morning. So he woke up in the morning, he was coming to the dining table and he was going to have his breakfast. These people did not have a good sleep, but he was very fresh like a daisy. The next morning, he thought at first he had forgotten all about what had happened, but he hadn't. First, these people thought grandfather would have forgotten what all happened the previous night, but he hadn't. He had everything in his mind. Over his third cup of coffee, he glared at Herman and me. What was the idea of all them cops staring, hooting round the house last night? He demanded. None of you bothered to leave a bottle of water beside mine. Look at this sentence. So I saw all the policemen going here and there. What was going on, man? He was asking the narrator and his brother. Now, you did not have the least botheration to leave a bottle for me during nights. Usually, I used to drink during nights when I am thirsty. You did not give me a bottle of water, leave a bottle in my bedroom. That was the complaint given by grandfather. Now, you can underline that line. Do you ever realize what it costs for a thirsty man? So, this man used to drink water whenever he feels thirsty. To look for water in the dining room last night, here you can come to a revelation that this man was the man who was going round the dining room in search of his bottle of water. So you can very well understand there were no ghosts, there were no burglars. That is just the imagination of the narrator who made all this hubbub. Do you understand? It's a very interesting humor where he had us there. So finally, we have come to a conclusion. Without anything, confirmed information, we cannot say anything to anybody. That is the highlight of the drama of this particular episode, where the narrator was completely frightened and confused. He could not go down and see and check. He called his brother, his mother and his neighbors, and the whole police officers were in his house. Everything was under confusion because of this narrator's doubts who was in the dining room. Can you understand, children? Now what I would like to tell you is, see the glossary, see all the meaning. Take your book, start writing 5 or 6 meanings, because that will help you for your handwriting. Go through the short answers. Short answers must be by hearted by you. Now I have completed Unit 1 first prose, poem Life and the Tempest. The Unit 1 is over. Now we have the second unit. I have completed the poem The Grumbling Family and the prose. Now it is your duty to take the book and write the meanings from the lesson and the short questions that is given at the back. Then we will go to the grammatical categories. Thank you, children.